The night of the party at my boss's house was supposed to be nothing more than a carefully staged social gathering. Another of those evenings where appearances mattered more than conversations. My boss prided himself on hosting in style. Long oak tables polished to a mirror sheen, an arrangement of candles casting soft golden halos on the walls, and a spread of food that looked like it had been prepared for a magazine shoot. I arrived early, as always. Years of working under him had trained me to show up before things became hectic, to offer a hand if needed, and to demonstrate that I could be relied upon. I remember standing in the wide entryway, the scent of fresh flowers mixing with the heavier smell of roasted meats wafting in from the dining room, when my attention caught on Kelly. She wasn't just blending into the crowd, chatting idly with coworkers or smiling politely at acquaintances. She was radiant, almost too radiant, and her laughter rang sharper than it usually did, the kind that drew attention even from those across the room. She leaned in close to one of my colleagues, her fingers brushing the sleeve of his jacket in a way that lasted too long to be casual. The gesture seemed small, fleeting, yet in that context, it shouted louder than words. The kind of touch that suggested familiarity, an int asterisk Macy born not in the moment, but in moments I hadn't been part of. My chest tightened as I stood there watching, the noise of conversation around me muffled by the pounding of my own heartbeat. For a second, I told myself I was overreacting. Parties made people looser, freer. Drinks lowered walls, and small gestures could easily be misinterpreted. But as I lingered in the doorway, it became impossible to ignore the glances she exchanged with him. The quick, silent acknowledgments that seemed to bypass everyone else in the room. I stepped back into the hallway, partly to steady myself and partly to get away from the suffocating press of realization that threatened to collapse my composure. That was when I noticed the guest room door, not fully closed but slightly ajar, the kind of gap that suggested someone had entered quickly and forgotten to pull it shut. Curiosity, or perhaps a gnawing sense of dread, pushed me forward. The lamp inside was dim but enough to reveal a man's suit jacket tossed carelessly over the armchair. It wasn't just any jacket. It had weight and structure, fine stitching, the kind a man doesn't easily discard in a stranger's home unless he's entirely comfortable. The cufflinks, silver with an engraved pattern I didn't recognize, gleamed faintly under the light. Next to them, on the armrest itself, rested something far less explainable. One of Kelly's earrings, a delicate piece she had chosen specifically for the evening. I froze, staring at that single earring, the image searing itself into my mind. She had both on earlier, I was sure of it. We had left the house together. I had complimented her, even noticed the way the jewels caught the light. And now one was missing, lying abandoned in a room that shouldn't have held any connection to her at all. My eyes drifted to the small side table. 2 wine glasses stood there, each bearing smudges of lipstick. Both were positioned close together, the kind of placement that comes when 2 people sit side by side, leaning toward each other, their laughter spilling into shared space. The bottle between them was freshly uncorked, condensation still sliding down its side, leaving damp rings on the wood. The more I looked, the more the air around me seemed to close in, heavy with implication. I stepped back, nearly stumbling into the doorway, and steadied myself before drifting toward the bathroom down the hall. When I opened the door, the scent hit me first sharp, distinctly masculine cologne, clashing with the faint traces of Kelly's usual perfume. It was invasive, foreign, and it clung to the air as if someone had just been there. The towels on the rack weren't neatly folded but twisted and heavy with moisture, their fibers damp from recent use. The sink bore faint splashes of water, and the mirror was fogged slightly at the edges, as though it had only just cleared after steam. Each observation stacked against the last, building a picture I wanted desperately to dismantle, to explain away. My rational mind scrambled for excuses. Perhaps someone else had used the room. Perhaps the jacket belonged to a guest who had overindulged and needed a place to rest. Maybe the earring had fallen at a different time, and I hadn't noticed until now. But the excuses were thin, fragile, and even as I constructed them, I knew they were lies I was telling myself in real time. I returned to the living room, every detail I'd seen clanging inside me like loose metal in a jar. But before I could even begin to piece it together, Kelly moved. She was in the center of the crowd now, clapping her hands, her voice bright and commanding. She shifted the attention seamlessly, pulling people toward the kitchen, arranging toasts, asking someone to help with the seating. The sudden flood of activity made the earlier discoveries feel surreal, almost dreamlike. With her at the helm, bustling between guests, pouring wine, and laughing as if nothing in the world had been amiss, the jacket, the glasses, the earring, all of it, seemed to fade into the background noise of a busy evening. The crowd didn't notice, and anyone who might have raised an eyebrow was quickly pulled into her orbit of efficiency. She had a way of doing that, of redirecting focus so thoroughly that inconvenient details slipped through unnoticed. I stood there, glass in hand, smiling mechanically as the night stretched on. But inside, the unease had rooted itself deep. The signs were there, woven into the fabric of the evening, and though Kelly had wrapped them in noise and motion, they remained undeniable to me. I couldn't yet call it proof, but it was enough to plant a seed of certainty that would only grow with time. And so, while laughter echoed off the high ceilings and glasses clinked in hollow celebration, I felt myself retreating inward, holding on to the knowledge that something had shifted irreversibly. I might not have had the strength then to confront it, but I knew the night would not leave me unchanged. The drive home that night was strangely quiet, though the city outside pulsed with its usual energy. My hands stayed clenched around the steering wheel, the white of my knuckles catching the glow of the dashboard lights. Kelly sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the cold blue screen, laughing at some message as if the evening had been nothing more than a cheerful success. She didn't notice the way I kept glancing at her reflection in the glass, didn't see the storm that had started behind my eyes. In the following days, I found myself replaying everything I had seen. The jacket, the cufflinks, the glasses, the earring, the perfume that didn't belong to me. It all looped through my mind like a reel I couldn't pause. But what began as isolated memories quickly expanded into something larger. Once suspicion has roots, every small detail becomes part of the same tangled vine. The first pattern I noticed was her phone. Kelly had always been attached to it, but in a casual way, checking messages, scrolling through news, sharing memes with me in the evenings. Lately, though, the phone had developed a new kind of secrecy. It was always placed face down on the table, a habit she hadn't had before. Notifications came, but she never flipped it over in my presence. Once or twice, I reached for it absent-mindedly, only to feel her hand dart out quickly, pulling it away with a forced laugh. She had also changed her passcode, a small but telling detail. For years we had known each other's, out of convenience if nothing else. Now, when I asked casually why, she shrugged and said she had been locked out too many times at work. It was flimsy, but I let it pass. Then came the geolocation. Kelly and I had shared locations on our phones for years, not out of distrust but out of practicality. Late nights, missed trains, quick pickups, it was useful. One day, without announcement, her dot simply disappeared. I asked once, half joking, if she had turned it off, and she brushed me aside, claiming some update must have reset the settings. But when I suggested we fix it, she waved it off again, saying she'd sort it later. She never did. The late nights started to multiply. Emergency deadlines, she said. Last-minute reviews, presentations, strategy calls. I wanted to believe her, but the receipts told a different story. A credit card statement revealed bar tabs in neighborhoods we never visited together, trendy spots more suited for couples than colleagues working overtime. When I asked her about them, she claimed she had grabbed drinks with the team after long hours. But the times never aligned. The tabs were late, often past midnight, long after most corporate gatherings wound down. Her perfume changed too. She used to favor light floral scents, ones that trailed behind her softly, almost imperceptibly. Now, I caught the sharper notes of Eunice *X cologne, heavier, bolder. Sometimes it was layered messily, as if she were masking something else. And more than once, when I hugged her hello, there was a trace of another cologne entirely masculine, musky, not one I recognized. It clung faintly to her clothes, hidden beneath the fresh spritz she had added on top. Our dinners together, once a quiet ritual after long days, began to fall apart. She canceled frequently, citing exhaustion or sudden calls. When we did sit down, she ate distractedly, her eyes flicking to her phone with every buzz. Her texts grew shorter, colder, punctuated with vague excuses and emojis that felt like placeholders rather than real responses. The evidence piled quietly, almost too neatly. One night, as I helped her unload her gym bag from the car, I noticed a tag sticking out of the side pocket. A small receipt, the kind you don't mean to keep. I pulled it out casually, but the words froze me in place. It was from a dry cleaner, listing a men's dress shirt for service. I glanced at her, but she was already stepping inside, oblivious to what I held. When I asked about it later, she claimed it belonged to a colleague who had spilled wine at a work dinner, and she had helped out. She said it with such ease that, if I hadn't already seen so much, I might have believed her. Then came the neighbor. I was outside one afternoon, watering the small patch of lawn, when Mrs. Henson, who lived across the street, stopped to chat. She was kind, elderly, and had a way of noticing things without ever seeming intrusive. Midway through the conversation, she mentioned in passing, "Your wife has such a polite friend who visits often. Tall fellow, dark hair. Always waves when I'm at the mailbox." I smiled thinly, heart racing, and excused myself quickly. Kelly had never mentioned such a visitor. The final piece, the one that locked the growing suspicion into near certainty, came from her car. She had left it for me to take in for servicing, and as I cleaned out the glove box, I found a small parking ticket wedged between the papers. The date leapt out at me. It was from the night she had told me she had gone to bed early, exhausted from meetings. The location was worse. A hotel garage downtown. She hadn't been there with me. Each discovery was like another tile in a mosaic, filling in the image I hadn't wanted to see. I tried to dismiss them individually, to chalk them up to coincidence or misunderstanding. But together they told a story too consistent to ignore. Every time I looked at her, laughing as she scrolled her phone, or kissing me absently on her way out the door, the weight of that mosaic pressed down harder. I began to track things quietly without confrontation. **TS of statements, photos of receipts, notes about times and places. I didn't yet know what I would do with them, but I knew I needed to see the pattern clearly for myself. By the end of those weeks, I felt like a shadow in my own home, moving silently alongside a life that was no longer truly mine. The seeds of doubt had grown into vines that wrapped around everything. Our dinners, our mornings, even the silence between us. And though I hadn't yet spoken the truth aloud, I could feel it tightening around me, preparing me for the moment when doubt would no longer be necessary, because the truth would reveal itself. It happened on a Thursday, one of those evenings when the sky dims earlier than you expect and the air carries a chill that doesn't quite belong yet. I had finished work earlier than usual, an unexpected cancellation freeing up my schedule. Normally, I would have texted Kelly, told her I was coming by, given her a heads up, but something inside me urged me not to. After weeks of gathering pieces of a puzzle, of tracing faint outlines of suspicion, I felt the weight of needing to see without warning, without preparation. The drive to her apartment felt longer than it was, each stoplight stretching time, each red glow on the asphalt thickening the anticipation. My key, still heavy on my ring, felt like a relic from a different chapter, one that still granted me access but no longer offered comfort. When I reached her building, I moved quickly, head low, as though secrecy mattered in a place where no one really knew me. The elevator hummed softly as it rose, its mirrored walls reflecting a version of me I barely recognized. Tense shoulders, clenched jaw, eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. By the time it dinged at her floor, my palms were slick. I walked down the hallway, carpet muffling my steps, and slid the key into the lock. The door yielded easily, almost too easily, as if it had been waiting for me. The first thing I saw were the shoes. Not Kelly's heels, which were neatly lined by the wall as usual, but a pair of men's leather dress shoes, polished but slightly scuffed at the toes, placed casually near the mat. Next to them, half hidden under the console table, lay a wallet. My eyes fell on the ID badge peeking out. Jake, it read. With the logo of a company I vaguely recognized from Kelly's stories about joint projects. My stomach dropped. The apartment smelled different. Not the faint lavender of Kelly's candles. Not the detergent she used, but a heavier scent. Warm, masculine, unmistakably cologne. The air itself seemed altered, carrying a charge that pressed against me as I moved further inside. Her bedroom door was ajar. From within came the faint rustle of sheets, the kind of sound that can't be mistaken for anything else once you know what you're listening for. I pushed it open slowly, every inch of movement like tearing paper. There they were, Kelly and Jake, sprawled across the bed, partially clothed but unmistakably in asterisk mate. Her hair was tousled, the sheets tangled around their legs, her hand still resting lazily against his chest. The scene froze as if time itself had decided to mock me, leaving me standing at the threshold while the truth displayed itself with cruel clarity. On the nightstand stood an open bottle of wine, the same brand I had seen at the boss's party days before, a detail that twisted the knife deeper. The glasses were half drained, one bearing the faint smear of lipstick. On the dresser lay his tie, discarded hastily, alongside her blouse. Every element of the room whispered what words could not. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind catalogued everything mechanically, as though detachment might shield me from collapse. The timestamp glowing faintly on the digital clock, the receipts tucked near Jake's wallet, the access card clipped to his lanyard. Proof layered upon proof until even the possibility of denial evaporated. Kelly's eyes widened when she finally noticed me. She jolted upright, clutching the sheet to her chest, her face flickering between shock, guilt, and calculation. Jake scrambled, reaching for his clothes, his expression unreadable, somewhere between fear and arrogance. But I didn't shout. I didn't slam doors or throw accusations. Instead, something inside me steadied, hardened by the weeks of preparation that had led me here. The anger had been burned away in advance, leaving only a cold clarity. I pulled my phone from my pocket and began snapping photos of the shoes by the door, the wallet with the badge, the half-empty wine glasses, the disheveled bed, the two of them caught together. The shutter clicks were the only sound in the room besides the frantic rustle of fabric. Kelly spoke my name, her voice trembling, but I didn't respond. I opened the dresser drawer and found another small receipt. Minibar charges from a nearby hotel, dated only a week earlier. I photographed that too. Every piece was part of the record I had been assembling, the final tiles locking into place. My movements were calm, deliberate, almost clinical. I stepped back into the hallway, opened her laptop bag, and there it was. A printout of an expense report with Jake's name listed as a participant in a client dinner. Another lie neatly filed. I took a photo, slid it back, and closed the zipper. When I returned to the bedroom, Kelly was already spinning a narrative, her words tumbling over each other. That it wasn't what it looked like, that I had misunderstood, that I had invaded her space unfairly. But her voice rang hollow, drowned out by the weight of what I had seen with my own eyes. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was already cemented in front of me. No longer shadow or suspicion, but solid fact. Every line of defense she might build was sand against the tide. I left the apartment without slamming the door, without so much as a backward glance. The hallway seemed longer on the way out, the carpet swallowing my steps in silence. The elevator ride down felt like descending into another life altogether, one in which I no longer owed her the benefit of doubt. Back in my car, I sat for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel, the photos still glowing on my phone screen. Proof. Not whispers. Not suspicions. Not fragments stitched together in the dark. Proof that could withstand any denial, any attempt at erasure. Proof that had taken the shape of men's shoes by the door, a wallet on the table, and two bodies in a bed where I no longer belonged. The cold certainty hurt more than the suspicion ever had. But in that pain there was also relief, the kind that comes when the endless gnawing questions finally end, even if the answers are unbearable. And as I drove away into the night, the city lights blurring past, I knew there was no going back. The mosaic of suspicions had formed its picture, and now the picture had come alive in the worst possible way. After the night at Kelly's apartment, I knew something inside me had changed permanently. It wasn't rage that burned in me now, nor despair, but something sharper and colder. Precision. I realized that what I needed wasn't confrontation or melodrama, but order. I had seen enough to know the truth, but the truth needed a spine, a skeleton that could stand on its own, independent of my emotions or her deflections. The next morning, I started sorting through what I already had. My phone gallery was a grim archive. Photos of receipts, parking tickets, *TS of her car's glove compartment, credit card statements with bars we had never visited together. Now it held the final set, the shoes by her door, the wallet on the console, the half-drained glasses on the nightstand, the two of them caught in their carelessness. Each image was time-stamped, cataloged automatically by the device, making the pattern undeniable. I created folders on my laptop, one for each category: financial, location, visual, third party. Into them I dropped *TS of her texts, bank notifications, geolocation logs I had quietly restored through cloud backups. In third party, I placed the comment from Mrs. Henson about the polite man she often saw visiting, and later, a note about the expression of the doorman who had hesitated before letting me in the previous week. None of it alone was explosive, but together, it created a latticework of corroboration. I didn't stop there. On the company portal, I pulled records of joint meetings where Jake's name appeared alongside hers, often coinciding with nights she had told me she was at team dinners. I saved *TS, not because I doubted my memory, but because I had learned how quickly lies multiply when exposed to light. At home, I went through our drawers with the detachment of an auditor. There, tucked between sweaters, was a dry cleaning slip matching the one I'd found earlier, this time showing a series of men's items billed under her account. I photographed it. In her purse, a hotel loyalty card slid half out of a side pocket, different from the one we used together. I left it untouched but noted the number embossed on its surface. Later, I looked it up online and confirmed recent stays. Another *T, another tile in the mosaic. Through all of this, I spoke little to Kelly. I answered her casual remarks with clipped words, my voice measured, my face unreadable. She noticed, of course. She began probing, asking if I was upset about work, if something was wrong. I nodded, shrugged, let her invent the reasons she needed. She grew more nervous with each passing day, her tone shifting from defensive to overly affectionate, then back again. Meanwhile, I took another kind of action, one far more practical. I disentangled. Quietly, without announcement, I began pulling myself out of the shared web we had built together. Our joint streaming accounts, our shared grocery app. I reset passwords, disabled auto-renewals, shifted costs onto her. On the bank side, I canceled the auto payments I had once set up to cover her recurring expenses. Utilities, subscriptions, even the lease car she insisted on. The emails arrived in her inbox, though she hadn't yet noticed. It wasn't punishment. It was clarity, her life, her choices, her responsibility. One evening, I pulled out a small box from my closet, the one I had hidden months earlier. Inside was the ring I had bought for her, a winter proposal I had envisioned during a trip we had planned together. The diamond winked faintly in the dim light, mocking me with its promise. I closed the lid and returned it to its drawer, knowing it would never see daylight on her finger. The trip too, already booked, deposits paid, was quietly canceled. Airline confirmations, hotel reservations, all of it swept aside with a few clicks. Instead of a shared adventure, I scheduled those days as personal leave. Space for myself. What surprised me most was how calm I felt as I moved through this process. There were no slammed doors, no shouting matches, no tears clawing at my throat. Instead, it was like sliding papers into a filing cabinet, one after another, until the drawers were full and orderly. The chaos of betrayal was becoming something I could carry not as confusion, but as fact. Kelly, meanwhile, began to sense the shift. She alternated between concern and dismissal, her moods as unpredictable as summer storms. One night she came home tearful, clutching my arm, promising that she wanted to fix things. The next, she was sharp, accusing me of becoming distant, of not caring about us. I let her words pass over me like rain on stone. I didn't argue because the argument had already been settled in reality. The evidence didn't waver with her emotions, and that gave me a strange kind of strength. The more she tried to control the narrative, the more I withdrew into silence and record-keeping. If she wanted to cast me as inattentive, she could. If she wanted to play the victim of my coldness, so be it. I no longer felt the need to defend myself against shifting stories. The dates, the receipts, the images, they spoke louder than either of us could. Sometimes, late at night, I would open the folders on my laptop and scroll through them slowly, not to torture myself, but to remind myself that I wasn't imagining any of it. In the fog of manipulation, in the constant gaslighting that seeped into her words, those files were my anchor. They steadied me, proved to me that my instincts hadn't been wrong, that the man I had become in her presence, paranoid, uncertain, doubting himself, wasn't the man I really was. It was during one of those quiet nights, staring at the harsh glow of the evidence folder, that I realized something crucial. I didn't need her to confess. I didn't need her to admit it, to crumble, to apologize. I already had everything I required. Her words, when they came, would only be another attempt to reshape the story, another distraction. The proof was enough. And so, with each passing day, I let the rope fray further between us. I answered her calls less quickly, her texts with more delay. When she suggested dinners out, I declined, citing work or exhaustion. When she hinted at future plans, I stayed silent. It wasn't cruelty, it was preparation. I was no longer her partner in a shared life, but an observer watching the slow unraveling of a story that had already ended, whether she acknowledged it or not. The ring stayed in its box. The canceled trip remained a ghost in my inbox. And the folders on my laptop grew, orderly and undeniable. I had chosen distance, and in that distance, I found not emptiness, but control. The silence between us didn't last long. Kelly could never tolerate silence. It was like a mirror she couldn't stand to look into, too revealing, too unforgiving. Within days of my withdrawal, she launched what I came to think of as her campaign of contradictions. It came in waves. Remorse, anger, persuasion, blame. Each day brought a new version of her, as if she were trying on different masks to see which one might work. The first wave was apology. She began small, leaving notes on the counter when she left for work. Sorry, I've been distracted. Let's reset tonight. Flowers appeared once, delivered to my office, an odd role reversal, considering I had always been the one to surprise her. That night, she cooked dinner at home, an elaborate meal she hadn't made in years, the kind she knew had once been my favorite. She smiled too much, touched my arm too often, laughed a little too loudly at her own stories. It all felt rehearsed, like a script she'd pulled out in desperation. When I didn't respond with the enthusiasm she expected, the second wave arrived. Blame. She accused me of being cold, of creating the distance she was only reacting to. She told me I hadn't been supportive enough, hadn't been present, hadn't made her feel desired. It was an old argument repurposed, but this time her tone carried the edge of someone cornered. She painted herself as the neglected partner, rewriting the past months into a narrative where my failures justified her choices. I listened quietly, but I kept my answers short, neutral. Inside, I wanted to laugh at the irony. How quickly the script shifted from, "I'm sorry," to, "It's your fault." Yet I also knew this was a tactic, conscious or not, meant to dislodge my certainty, to soften my stance. If I took on the blame, the focus would shift away from her actions. But I had my files, my timestamps, my receipts. Every attempt at gaslighting shattered against the solidity of those records. The third wave was promise. She began talking about the future in sudden, sweeping gestures. Trips we should take, homes we should look at, even children, a topic she had avoided for years. She dangled visions of stability and renewal, trying to recapture a sense of inevitability between us. One night she even pulled out a notebook, sketching plans for renovations in her apartment. Spaces she said we could make ours. I watched her write, her pen moving feverishly across the page, and I thought only of the photographs in my folder. The wine glasses, the men's shoes, the damp towels. Her sketches felt like a theater set, elaborate but hollow, ready to collapse at the faintest push. Then came anger. This wave was the hardest to endure, not because it hurt me, but because it revealed the depth of her desperation. She raised her voice, accused me of being vindictive, of spying, of fabricating a story that wasn't real. She demanded to know why I looked at her phone, why I cared about her receipts, why I was so obsessed with controlling her. I didn't rise to it. I let the accusations hang in the air, knowing they weren't questions at all but distractions, attempts to blur the edges of her own guilt. When her anger didn't land, she circled back to apology. Tears this time, real or well-practiced, I couldn't tell. She sat on the floor one evening, her back against the couch, her face buried in her hands, sobbing about how she had made mistakes but didn't want to lose me. I sat across the room, my laptop open, scrolling through a spreadsheet for work, her voice trembling in the background like static. She cried harder when she realized I wasn't rushing to console her. For the first time in our years together, I let the distance stand. The cycle repeated itself, sometimes all in a single day. Morning texts of regret, afternoon calls laced with bitterness, evening promises of change. I documented them all. *TS, timestamps, short notes in my phone. I didn't do it to punish her. I did it to protect myself from forgetting, from letting her words distort what I knew to be true. Gaslighting works best in hindsight when memories blur. With records, nothing blurred. What fascinated me most was how transparent her patterns became once I stopped engaging emotionally. It was like watching a magician repeat the same trick from the wrong angle. You see the sleight of hand instead of the illusion. She said she had been faithful, yet I had photos of her with Jake at her apartment. She claimed she had stayed late at the office, yet I held receipts timestamped after midnight from hotel bars. She insisted I was imagining things, yet my neighbor's passing comment about the polite man fit seamlessly into the puzzle. Every denial only deepened the contrast between her story and the evidence. There were moments when she tried tenderness, small gestures that would once have softened me. A hand on my shoulder as I typed, a kiss on the back of my neck in the morning, the casual love you, tossed into the air as she left. They slid off me like rain against stone. I could feel the performance in them now, the calculation. Each act was an attempt to probe for weakness, to see if the old version of me, the forgiving one, the one who bent too easily, still lived inside. But he was gone. Late one night, when she had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open to the evidence folders. I clicked through them slowly, each photo another nail in the coffin of her narrative. I thought of the ring still tucked in its box, of the winter trip I had canceled, of the way I had once imagined standing in front of her with a future in my hand. That man felt like a ghost, someone I had already buried. In his place was someone quieter, stronger, steadier. Someone who didn't need her explanations, because he already had the truth. Kelly must have sensed it. Her campaign grew more frantic with each passing day, as if she could feel the ground crumbling beneath her. The irony was that the more she fought to rewrite the story, the more I detached from it entirely. She was performing for an audience that no longer existed. In the end, her words were nothing more than echoes against the walls of a house I had already begged *N to leave. And though she tried every tool she had, apology, blame, promises, anger, it all collapsed against the immovable fact of what I had seen, recorded, and could never unsee. The blow came from beyond my control. My boss's wife sent me camera footage. Kelly and Jake slipping into his office, leaving separately through the back door. Hours later, compliance called me as a witness. An investor froze a deal, citing conflict of interest. What had been private betrayal became professional scandal. I realized her choices now carried costs far beyond our home. They tainted reputations, contracts, money. I ended it without fireworks. I returned her keys, boxed her things, and sent the compiled evidence where policy required. The ring was sold, the trip canceled, every shared thread severed. No dramatic goodbye, no begging for closure. I filled my calendar with work and therapy, giving shape to days that no longer belonged to her. Walking away didn't feel like defeat. It felt like reclaiming myself, leaving behind the role of safety net she